more growth and things that hurt growth. Now, I mentioned another things actually accentuate growth, but the counteractions. So one of the ones we've dealt with before, and we'll do it again. So these are things that create growth and inhibit growth. And I space these up. We're trying to get an idea of how economic growth occurs. This one we dealt with before in roles of government. One of the roles of government was ensure perfect competition. A way you ensure perfect competition is to make sure that you have private property. Let me switch to the straight line. Is to make sure that people are protected in their things. So private property again protects everybody. Everybody says, "Oh, it's for the rich, for the billionaires." The billionaires are always going to be protected because we're going to see in several slides, the billionaires are going to get in bed with the government and be well connected with it. That's why most billionaires do not believe in private property. To quote Schwab, who was at the Davos group, he says, the common people have nothing, and they will be happy. A few elite like himself have everything, the billionaire class, so they like to get in bed with government. But private property is a necessary condition for growth. For growth, for development, for improvement, because private property says everything you have, and it protects everybody. I always say it just protects, no, it protects the lesser rich, the middle class, the poor, because it says anything you do to improve yourself can make you better off. The Netherlands is, I put on handles. It was once a swamp. It was the delta of the Rhine River, and it just was a giant swamp. Netherlands had private property, so over time, the Netherlands people individually went and would take land. They'd build dikes around it. They'd spend decades building windmills. The windmills would pump the water out of the diked off land, and then you'd have farmland that was very good and functional. So they'd have all this nice, happy farmland now, and but this would be what? This would be the work of years, of decades. In terms of, and that made the Netherlands one of the richest of European countries. In fact, to this day, they're still the tallest of European people, Dutch, which I probably wonder if they have a tight distribution because they don't produce many basketball players, but they're the tallest average population. Private property yields several benefits. One, anything is yours is yours. You secure in person and items. No one can take what is yours from you. In other words, you have the right to say no. If someone comes and says, I want to take this from you, I want to buy it from you, you can say, no, I will not sell. That is security. No one can just snag it from you. When they snag it from you, that's thieving. A lot of people like the idea of thieving because they want to take what they don't earn. We'll deal with that one in a second. There's more equality because it protects the poor as well as the rich. Donald Trump, who was Citizen Trump, going back a decade plus, a decade and a half, he disliked the peasants having private property because he couldn't take from them to give to himself. He'd go to counties and cities and say, give this person's land and give it to me. He's not the one that said, this is common among the billionaire class. He only changed his opinion, when he ran for president. And in fairness, I will give Trump his due. He's actually held to property being a right now for all people. So I give him credit. He pandered towards freedom, and he's kept his word about that. But there's more equality because it protects the small and the mighty. The mighty always be protected. The small, because you can say, I can also say that's mine. It cannot be taken from me, and they can't. It allows long-term investment. People can plan, invest, develop. Like I said before, go back to the previous slide. You go to the Netherlands, that's what? That's planning. The building of all the railroads in the United States before the federal government nationalized the public transport railroad, the human transport railroad, was done all by the private sector. People would plan and say, how am I going to do this? How is it going to be paid out? How am I going to generate my return? And they plan 2, 3, 4, 5 years out, and that becomes part of culture. That becomes the way people think. Not just the powerful. It becomes the way the common people think. Because I am secure in what I have. I can develop along. It allows people, again, now long-term investment does, I admit, go right into planning. People are going to plan and develop because why? I'm going to get a return so I can look long term, say what kind of return I want, how is this going to pay me off, how is that windmill going to benefit me and my family for the next 4 decades. Maybe if I build it better, it can benefit us for the next 100 years. But that's a return because why? My family will get the benefit. My children, my grandchildren, my great grandchildren, my great 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 grandchildren get the benefit. So I may spend 20 years doing it. In fact, many times with those windmills and those dikes and other things they did, when you're clearing the back for you, whatever, you don't see the return. But you were working on it for decades. It's your children that see the return. That's planning. That's long-term investment. There's a return to effort. In other words, private property says you get to keep what you earned, what you developed. It is yours. It cannot be taken from you. It cannot be claimed from you. And so you get a return to what you do. And whether you're just if I'm just a 9 to 5, guy working in a mill, I go and get a book and I get some furniture, those are mine. I can hand them down. I can give them to somebody. I can have them. And that is a wonderment. People learn on a cultural level, which I would mention, delayed gratification. Because go back again. I always go back to women, but delayed gratification is something that fits in the personal level and on the business level. A difficulty is the fact that people do not think about learning delayed gratification. About I will wait until I get something. I am willing to give up something now today to get more in the future and stuff like that. And so they want everything now, but when they want everything now, they create a lag. They create a shortage for themselves because they can't build, invest, compound because they want it now. And that's something you can go into, middle class and poor people today, and even among the rich too. It's just the rich have more safeguards that bail them out. In which the poor and middle who understand delayed gratification, decades from now will be a lot wealthier. The ones who do not understand delayed gratification, who want the big car now, the all the fancy eating outs, all the goodies and stuff like that, they will stay poor. Or they will stay exactly that. Now, if you want to stay where you are, there's nothing wrong with that, as long as you accept responsibility for your actions. But even as every learning delayed gratification, if I delay, I will get something better. I'll get improvement. I mean, heck, I pick on the social implications of this is the fact of the whole, hook up and friends with benefits and stuff like that. That's a lack of delayed gratification. But then people don't put the time, energy, effort into being with people, into knowing someone, into making them better for you. They don't put that into somebody else. And that's a killer. Places that are more secure. I guess I should be doing this in red, but in GDP and property rights, stuff like that, see the GDP and GDP per person go up over time. They grow faster. I'll mention this one. Ireland, when it became independent from Britain, fully independent in like 1923, pursued a very extensive socialist economy. The government was basically in everything, trying to control everything, trying to tax everything, and Ireland stayed stagnant for 70 years. They didn't move forward. When you get to the 90s, the Irish freed their property rights. They freed, they established full property rights, not this limited stuff by approval of the state. Did you do the 15 forms? They opened their economy up and they made property rights and other things more secure. The Irish economy took off. They went from being what's called periphery to being core European high living standards of living in like 2 decades. It was stunning surge forward. But then you have the lack of private property. Now, the reason I have this, those who made the first Thanksgiving. Now, you look at that, and those are the Pilgrims, and you notice a lot of them are dead. Well, when the Pilgrims, created, when they did this, and they'll show on the slide saying, mention Plymouth. When the Pilgrims came to Plymouth, they said, we will share everything jointly like the saints. We will do what the apostles did, and we will put everything, Now, the apostles did not put anything in. People put stuff in. They could keep things or not keep things, but stuff they put into common was being common. It was a choice of the individual, not the collective. Well, the collective said, we're going to do this. And so the pilgrims did not work as hard as they needed to when you're breaking ground in a new world. They worked as much hard as the next guy. And, well, you see it. There are a lot of dead people. Now, I'm hard on them, but keep in mind, they were living in an area that is not tropical. Although I've said many times, you know, these people here, they did pretty good. That family in the car, it's like, whoa. I probably think they're doing stuff on the side, not letting other people know. The family here looks like they did well, but they lost a little girl, so see, she didn't make, little one they didn't make. But I put on the sense of they did just enough. They did the average. No one saw a reason to work more than ever. So when you lose private property, in fact, it's one of the reasons we say ensure perfect competition. One of the first things to start next to is property rights, because markets will react very slowly, if at all. When you have no private property, there is no return to efforts. So while demand may shift around because people want things, supply doesn't shift around. In fact, supply will probably slowly creep inward because there's not a return to your efforts, not a return to what you do. Markets will be very slow. They'll be staggering. People learn to get lazy, and this laziness is not just idea. Remember, I talked about a problem with GDP counting when you have do-it-yourself. In a lot of countries, the government taxes do-it-yourself because the stupid, greedy, fudging government wants to put its hands in everything because those politicians think everything belongs to them. And they all make sure they get rich. I'm thinking about Hunter Biden's, a millionaire. Why is he a millionaire? Because Daddy's Joe Biden. If Daddy had been, Joe Sixpack, Hunter Biden would have, died of his crack addiction 3 decades ago. I'm not being cruel. I'm being factual. People get lazy. Firms get lazy. Because firms will be feeding it to government, so the government will be taking care of them, and they know they're not going to get benefit for their good actions, so why bother? And keep in mind, firms can get lazy. Cultural laziness creeps into firms. That's why, going back to letting firms die is very important. That's why I would antitrust number firms, is because they get lazy. And media extraction. No one builds, no one improves, everyone just extracts. No one puts the effort in. They just leach it all out, but no one puts in. Because remember, putting something in, I'll get the payoff in 4 years or 5 years or 15 years, but it's not my property. So I just extract. The coastal population, as I mentioned already, becomes inert. They become fatalistic. Nothing can change anything. I can't improve my outcome. I do not control my destiny. So why try? In fact, politicians like that. It was a complaint, an article 2 years ago about how in Peru, the population was given extensive property rights, including the poor. A lot of socialists were complaining, no, they lost their social consciousness of being poor. They're too busy trying to make or get things or have property. They're not raising the banner of revolution and elevating the socialist parties to advance the working class. In other words, the people running these parties are concerned about them getting power, wielding the power of the government. Oh, for the people, which means for those ruling, the people will get, what the elite said they should have. So you create, that fatalism's a killer. I did Plymouth. Now, Plymouth only had shared property for a year, common property for a year. After they got rid of the common property, right? Output in Plymouth surged. They had growth, they had expansion, and keep in mind, Plymouth was built in New England, which is not exactly, the hub central of everything cool. They started expanding, growing development, and moved nicely. Jamestown took longer because in Jamestown, we was settled earlier, 13 years earlier. Jamestown kept property held in common. In fact, one of the reasons everybody in Jamestown, they always complain, nobody wants to work. Oh, no. See, in Jamestown, all the property was held in common. Everybody says, well, the rich people, they just wanted to, the nobles and the people there who were trying to get in Jamestown, they all knew if they got gold, they could keep it. Yes, because what they're trying to say is anybody working on farming and stuff like that, all that in Jamestown was shared. It was communal. So if you went and you were busting your hump, working 14 hours a day on the farm, trying to make it go, you put all your output in the communal pile and everybody get an equal share, as determined by the governor. So if the governor didn't like you, you weren't even getting much of a share. Whereas if you went out and you hunted for gold and got gold, you get to keep the gold. So if you got gold, the gold was yours. That you could keep. It wasn't shared. That's individual gain. If I went out hunting and I got deer or fox or anything, pelts, whatever it was. I know you get a deer, you're gonna get a pelt, but you're also gonna get meat. That was all mine. So the Jamestown population kept going out to get other resources because working in Jamestown didn't make sense because it was shared collectively. And so Jamestown became more authoritarian state. It became a totalitarian state. Let's do that one. Authoritarian is just what it is. It became a totalitarian state in which everybody was squeezed to make it function. In fact, Jamestown was still importing food from Britain 3 years in. In fact, I think it was 1611, maybe 1612. Jamestown was nearly abandoned. They put everybody up on the ships and started sailing back when they encountered the relief ship coming in with more food and supplies. Because the collectivization of Jamestown didn't work. When the same time that Plymouth got rid of their collective ownership, Jamestown got rid of their collective ownership, Jamestown saw its food go up. Once Jamestown privatized it and got rid of, the autocratic rule and, land being held in common, everything goes in the common pool, they privatized it. Boom, everything went up. People said, well, people will be exploited. No, because remember, especially when you have plentiful land, you can't exploit anybody. As soon as working for somebody else, they have to get paid. And if you want to be generous to somebody, you could choose to. You could say, the lazy guy, help me build my bond, then I'll give you food. And it could be, and people are very generous too. Your neighbor's working as you're working. He's always out when you're out there. He or she, and they have a bad time. You go and help them because why? They're suffering. You saw, and it was, you could give that thing. Venezuela has lost over a quarter of its population because of being for lack of a better term, a pseudo-communist state. In other words, when you had the election of Chavez, he was replaced by Maduro, and then you have the current guy because Maduro told Trump, you come and get me. We will destroy you and crush you. And the U.S. Special Force went and seized him. And the Venezuelan military said, because his military was all hired for theoretically loyalty, but they won't see him go because somebody else will take over and they'll squeeze it for them. But Venezuela went from a upper end middle income country to a dirt poor country that saw a quarter of its population flee because nothing could be made. They had, remember those things where I showed you the $1 trillion note? That was Venezuela. That was Venezuela. So when you have those large governors, you get that mass starvation, stuff like that. Because government squeeze everything for the betterment of government. The population, irrelevant. They don't matter. They're just human beings. I always pick Zimbabwe here because in many countries, and socialists and communists love doing this, they associate private property with communism, or with imperialism. With, if you have private property, that's something Westerners do. That's something the Americans do, the British do. No, private property is kind of like human. And so a lot of countries associated private property with race and imperialism. Now, governments like making that association, anything like that, because it means all property belongs to government. Now, why have Zimbabwe here? Zimbabwe for most of the 20th century, was an exporter of food. Now with Zimbabwe, so I keep losing my mouse when it gets on gets the little mouse. Zimbabwe would export food. So Zimbabwe, get back here, mouse, exported half of its food. In other words, it fed its population. Its population was well fed. They were generating so much food surpluses that they exported half their food. And they made money. Zimbabwe they'd actually developed a wine industry, which again, developing grapes is a prime process because developing grapes takes years. It takes about 5 years to start developing good grapes. To develop, wine level grapes and stuff like that, I think it takes like 15 years. And when you got to cultivate those vines and grow them right, I don't get it myself, but it's, that takes that. That's a multi-year effort to get a return. Well, when Zimbabwe gained independence, they eliminated property rights. Well, they had it for about 20 years. By a treaty granting independence, people would have property rights. When the 20 years ended, the government got rid of property rights, saying that was colonialist exploitation of the Zimbabwe population. And everybody lost property rights, not just the settler population, the domestic population lost property rights. And the government believed and taught these things, a lot of countries teach, that the person who has property, they just sit there and the money falls from the sky and rains on them and don't have to do anything. And they just sit there rocking back and forth and drinking mint tulips and stuff like that. I don't know what a mint tulip is. But they think that. They taught that. So the government would take the property from other people and give it to people, their cronies. But the government giving to their cronies would say, now remember, we're going to see some corruption shortly. I'm going to want some kickback from this. Got to be some for me too. And the cronies thought they wouldn't have to work. And the cronies knew this. She didn't have to work, so they think, why is the property not giving me money? So they practiced immediate extraction. So in Zimbabwe, people they chopped down all the grape vineyards to sell them for firewood because that would make me money now. And they'd have to work at keeping up a grape vineyard because grape vineyard requires a lot of work. But that's a payoff for someone. The government may give it to somebody else next year or somebody else in 2 years from now. I want my money now. They do the same with orchards. Orchards disappeared, turned into quick firewood and stuff like that. So, they exported all the tree fruits. They exported, they were gone. They tore up, Zimbabwe has monsoons. It has wet seasons and dry seasons. And so the large irrigation systems have been built by farmers to take care of the land during dry seasons. Well, the people who had temporary control of the farms, the government, they would tear up the irrigation system, sell it to make money. They would sell the tractor to make money now. So these farms were destroyed. Our food output decreased. By the time you get to 2010, Zimbabwe was receiving emergency charity food from other countries. Zimbabwe was a net food importer and still is a net food importer. And so that was a brute. It's because the communists want everything controlled by the government. So they said property rights is a function of imperialism and race. It was used to exploit people. And so Zimbabwe believed this. Now, the ruler of Zimbabwe, he got rich. The ruling party, they all fight to be ruling party in Zimbabwe. You get rich. You'll get rich as government. In fact, Zimbabwe has a very unequal distribution of income. The top 1% has over half the GDP. Top 1% all connected with who? The government. And keep in mind, people say, well, Zimbabwe is exploiting capitalists. No, it's actually by constitution a heavy socialist country. Remember, the government runs everything. So people in the government, so shut up, they get the goodies without having to work for it. You got to ask, when you eliminate property, who wins? Who are the winners? Who tends to win? These are the people who support the elimination of property rights. The government is always the main winner. When you get rid of property rights, the government's the winner. The government loves getting rid of property rights because, come on, Charlie, because the government gains the power. The government is doing great. It's It's swimming in goodies. It's getting all the fun stuff. Everyone's going to go to the government to get advances. That's why you have the senator from Massachusetts, Liz Warren, going, if you built a factory or a business or anything like that, well, that's nice for you, but we all build it. It belongs to all of us, because she wants to take something she didn't want to work for. Because she belongs to collectively, because she wants the money from it. Now, did she say, when you became a Harvard professor, claiming to be the first Native American in Harvard, yeah, white chick, really white, blue eyes, blonde hair, well, now white because she's old, but that's how she got a Harvard professorship. Did it belong to everybody? Could I go? Oh, it belongs to me too. Could I pill for half her paycheck and say I can use it more than she does because she doesn't need it because she's just so she didn't need all that money. Could I do that? She no, oh, it's mine. Oh, why she claim somebody else's work? Because she wants. So government is the main winner. No, they're cloaking all sorts of banalities, but the ultra rich win. And again, the ultra rich will seek special favor from government. When you see these things, these dollar signs here, it says, the corporations, the more the corporate, the megacorps will just, they're going to have access to government. In fact, they want to eliminate private property because then if they want anything, they just have to go to the government and grease the proper politicians. Remember, I could be the biggest corporation, you could be Bill Gates. You want to get some guy's land on a lake, and that guy can say what? And there's nothing you can do about it. Property rights. But when the government assigns who gets something, you can go to the government and say, I need that. And the government will take it from him and give to you. And that's the way the government does. You just use the major corporation, they'll grease the government. And so the government wins. The ultra rich and megacorps, they win because they buy protection from the government. That's why I pick on the billionaires and the megacorps, because most of them advocate the elimination of property rights. Klaus Schwab saying, you'll have nothing to be happy. I love the President of the United States. I don't care which one. Go to Davos and say, we're doing a billionaire tax. Everything over $1 billion will be taken from you, your wealth. You will have nothing and be happy for it. They'd all go insane. Now, I'm not going to advocate that because it's very inefficient. Antitrust law I would advocate for. But see, they seek and gain to get special privileges. Warren Buffett's full empire was built on getting exemptions from rules so he would have an advantage. The other billionaires, before they were billionaires, if they had the things they advocated for when they were starting, even Elon Musk, they wouldn't exist. Again, they tend to support, I lean forward so I can see the mouse, large, powerful government, because that means no competition. No one else can come in. It's them running it. Here's an interesting case. This was just overruled. It was a 9-0 decision. In other words, the whole Supreme Court, it was one the conservative justices took in, but the liberal justices signed on into. In May 2023, because a lot of states, especially local governments, used to do this. They would use unpaid taxes to claim all equity. In other words, someone would dig out a $50 fine on your property, right, and claim that. And then what they would do is the county would seize your house, sell off their house for the $2,000 fine, a $50 fine, and then keep the whole money from the house. And so they send these bills to you innocuous, looking like it's junk mail, so you don't pay it off. And then they go and they'd seize your house and they'd sell it. Now, who do you think was getting tagged off most on this? It wasn't Bill Gates. He's got the lawyers. It wasn't the rich guy. They usually got something else. It was what? the middle and the poor were getting tagged out. They were losing this because, localities seized it, because then they could sell your property out from under you, keep all the receipts from selling off your property. And then people, tried fighting this, but counties were finding out they could do this. More and more counties are doing this. So, protested, did a lawsuit, said you can't screw the government. Went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, again, the 9-0 protecting everybody, especially, again, private property. Who's protecting? The poor, especially. The poor. Some poor dirt guy, with his semi-dilapidated house because he's poor. He was losing his house. And they said, on a $50 fine put against him. Why? Because they want to take his house, they could sell it, make money. And so it was really, the only title to take what, owed, nothing more. They reaffirmed in that 9-0 decision a certain aspect of property rights to keep the government from being abusive. Why was the government being abusive? It got it more money. Who is it being abusive against? The poor in the middle, because they couldn't fight. They were the easiest to trick and lie to. So when you have insecure property rights, you shift the playing field, not in favor of the little guy, like the common stories say. You're shifting in favor of the very big guy. Okay, this leads to brick theory. Now, brick theory is a natural it's going to stand to circulate my blood again. It's a natural reflection or interaction of the government getting involved. The weight of the government, the weight of the state, all the restraints and controls weigh down the person. Heavy taxes, heavy regulations. So the concept of brick theory is the heavy tax and regulations of the government drives down, grinds the average person. You don't have property rights, you don't have protections, and the ultra rich and the corporations benefit. Now, keep in mind, this grind down, they have to pay. The ultra rich and corporations are paying more tax and regulation. They're paying for access, but where they benefit from is there are no people rising to compete with them. No small, no medium firms, they're gone. No poor, lots of poor. No lesser rich, no middle class, because they're gone. The government separates them, keeps them out, and everything just belongs to rich. And so the sheer weight of the taxes, the regulations, the loss of property rights acts as a blockage. And you need to have access, but access costs, as we'll see again, money. Now I'll go to another problem. This is a cultural problem. Corruption, bribes, kickbacks, the use of government to enrich oneself. And the problem is people always use corruption. Corruption. The guy running for Attorney General of South Carolina, someone else is going, he's corrupt. They call, everybody uses the word corrupt so much that they don't see it when it exists because everybody calls everybody corrupt. Why does everybody do that? Well, because people don't like corruption. And so it's a way of beating my opponent by calling him corrupt. And yes, I have called people corrupt, but I'm pretty circumspect. Like, there's favoritism, what it's like. And yes, I've called the stuff that, Joe Biden and Hunter Biden has done corruption because it directly benefited him. It was how is he getting all these giant contracts? And then you have the Vice President of the United States tell the Ukrainian government to fire the prosecutor who's dealing with corruption because the Vice President's son is associated with a firm engaged in corruption. And he's getting paid while doing it. That's a problem. Now, a lot of countries and stuff like that treat corruption like it's a physical disorder, almost like a disease. It's like, no, corruption is a disease of the spirit. It's basically a reflection of the sin nature of man. We all are corrupt. We all are fallen. And again, using the term corruption, what is corruption? You lie, cheat, steal, whatever it is, because you want to make yourself better off at someone else's expense. I know how people say, private sector does that. Businesses do that all the time. Business, they're corrupt. Yeah, when you have a large corporation embedded with the government, that's probably going to be a form of corruption. When I'm selling you donuts and I'm selling them cheaper than somebody else, and I'm getting rewarded by selling you donuts, that is not corruption. Because why? I have made you better off and been rewarded for making you better off. That's the private sector. As I said, people use corruption in a lot of things what they don't like. Corruption is a form of stealing. That's why I tend to say stealing selling expense. And this can happen everywhere. A common form of corruption. Let me do this one. I was a student going. He goes. I can't believe Americans. Americans are so honest. You know what I mean? He goes. United States. Let's see. Oops. Trying to. There we go. Say 20. You can be getting something. And he goes. He basically goes. I can't believe Americans are so honest. You can tell. I look at him like tentacles coming out of his head. Like. Honest? He goes, yes. He goes, in the United States, you can take that 20, put it down, say, I'm paying for these goods, talk to the person behind you, taking your eye off the money. And when you turn around, they give you exact proper change. He goes, in my country, if they feel you're not paying attention, they pocket the 20. When you turn around, they say, you're going to pay for it. And if you say, I just gave you money, no, you didn't pay yet. What are you going to pay for it? And he goes, and they'll try to give you improper change. I mean, that happens in the United States now, but that's because people know how to act. But, that would, he goes, people would steal. Now, when you steal from a firm, from your customers, it's always bad. It's bad when you steal from your customers because your customers get a little upset. You're stealing from them. People don't like being stolen from because it's their money. So they don't come back. When a firm steals from its customers, they don't come back. That's why a lot of firms will get things of like, don't let people know. People shouldn't know. Protect the innocent. The market's very harsh when you steal. Because the public says, I don't deal with you anymore. That's why some Supergirl movies coming out and she looks like acts like a drunk, dangerous super being who hates everything and, doesn't want to do what's right and stuff like that, and then she get all thinking, oh, people don't like my movie. They should like it. I'm entitled. No. You have the right to make what you want. They have the right to say, no, thank you. See, it's a corruption where she demands somebody should force them to see it. The type of corruption spirit. Now, stealing in the private sector creates lots of costs. In fact, when you have a low trust society, a high stealing society, that's when you end up with a lot of, tribalness and cliques and isolation of people because we can't trust someone we don't know. It's a loss of high utility when you have that. As I said, corruption will create its own protection, especially on the government. People in the government and people in politics, they benefit from it and they'll protect it. You always have, this one. One man's view of corruption is another man's idea of advancing a good cause. No, they call it corruption. We're advancing a cause. I'll take an easy one. It's a type of corruption, if you want to call it kickback, that's still corruption, in which the U.S. government, gave a former politician $3 billion a year to help people in Haiti. It was a foreign aid program. Almost the whole $3 billion stayed in Washington, D.C., has donations to candidates from that person's political party, and also to make sure her friends got good jobs. When she was paying a lot of people $250,000, $300,000 a year income to live well. None of the money was going to what people was meant to be. That's corruption. It was that whole $3 billion was wasted. There was no return. In fact, I mentioned before, and this is an example of Virginia, which I probably have cited later in one of the PowerPoints here. In Virginia, they actually passed a law. Virginia passed a law. If a government worker sees somebody engaging in corruption, it is illegal for them to tell people someone is engaging in corruption because that may hurt somebody. It's illegal. You actually go to, if I was a government worker and I saw somebody engaging in misuse of funds to enrich themselves, misuse of state funds to enrich themselves, and I informed the DA or the feds or somebody, I would go to jail under Virginia state law. And they say, well, this is an anti-corruption measure. How is it anti-corruption to persecute someone who revealed corruption? And Virginia cloaked as an anti-racism initiative, which is really racist if you think about it, because you're implying what? People of color can't not engage in corruption. Now, dealing with corruption, in this biblical, the standards go both ways. The tax collectors were hated because they were corrupt. And Christ pointed out, everyone is corrupt, and anyone who's corrupt should be treated the same way. Whether a friend or not my friend is an irrelevancy. If I'm looking for corruption, in other words, the law cuts both ways. You measure the same way. Now, corruption is parasitic, kills, chokes. I already explained how it chokes the firm, and mockers tend to, fight corruption. They punish it. They can't purge it because corruption is a social ill. It is an illness of the soul. It's part of our sin nature. We can beat it down. Now, a lot of modern corruption, especially in the West, is related to ivory towerism because, intellectuals will teach and people, will teach that a businessman is just like corruption. It's not. I'm watching a cartoon where it says, yeah, we're gonna do this. No, that's not stealing. That's being a businessman. No, it's not. It's stealing. But they want an interesting now. This is being done by Amazon. I say, okay, Amazon, you stole. We're going to take away all the money from the shareholders of Amazon and the people making the cartoon, the writers, the directors, the voice actors. All them going to be taken from them, given to everybody because they're thieves. Would they think of that way? No. Again, markets do not eliminate. Wall Street Journal will say markets eliminate corruption. No. Markets do not eliminate corruption. Markets fight corruption. Markets operate best in a corrupt-free society because corruption is a bleeding, sucking wound. And when corruption is not solved, it spreads. Shoplifting crime is an example, a simple form of corruption. What's corruption? Mostly the big one I always worry about is bribes, kickbacks, stuff like that. People deal with the government because the government can keep sucking people dry, and there are always more people to tax. But anytime you're thieving is a type of corruption because what I'm doing, I'm engaging in theft. But it's a problem in many U.S. cities where people steal. That's why you end up with food deserts. Because why? The high theft. Food stores operate in a 1% profit margin. You have a lot of theft, you wiped out the profit margin. And I mentioned before, the mayor of New York's like, I'm going to create a state-run grocery store. It's going to cost me $30 million to build one, to make one here. The private sector can do it for $1.5 million on average. The same kind of location, same place, stuff like that. We're not talking about building one off in somewhere Iowa. In other words, for that one grocery store he's going to build, it's going to take him 3 years. The private sector could build 10 to 15 and have them up in less than a year. And that's just government being inefficiently wasteful. There may be some government using it makes it easy when you're inefficiently wasteful. It's easy for corruption to slip in. But why did they become a food desert? Shoplifting. Why do people go in shoplifting? Go back to the school system where they teach, well, people selling you goods, it's like they're stealing from you. They're just thieves too. They give an excuse for corruption. Again, on the macro level, the cost of corruption is heinous. And corruption tends to seep in the governmental sector. And the bigger the government gets, the better the corruption gets for people who are corrupt because they can use it to make themselves wealthy. They can squeeze everybody like grapes. And the government goes, yes, because they make themselves. That's why corruption will seep in the government. Now, society will accept corruption. It's going to be brutal. Because the government, unlike the firms, individuals, unlike markets, can steal, loot, and pillage and make it all legal. You'll see a number of cartoons are going to have corruption because people tend to think of it's like this one or that one, this one. No, That's a Nigerian cartoon. Culture is the first break on corruption. High utility. Does the population accept corruption or not? I like this quote from Lord Devlin. I first heard it 3 decades ago. If the whole dead weight of sin were to fall upon the law, it could not take the strain. The law would break. Now go back to Law and Order. Law and Order just deals that, like I mentioned before, only deals that 1%, half of the population that is going to do bad things. Because the other 99% don't do bad things. The high utility, principle, morality act as a brake. So don't do bad things. But when corruption becomes acceptable, when everybody says it's fine, when you go back to the previous quote of, it's just another person's idea of advocating for a good cause. Once you do that, all these intellectual stuff like that say it's all fine if it's somebody I like. Then you get looting, pillaging, robbing. Because why? They think it's fine. It's acceptable. If culture thinks it's acceptable, you increase, the strain of society. The amoral and the immoral will feed corruption because it works for them. There are levels of corruption. And this is, and keep in mind, levels mean what is my society? How does it look at corruption? And a lot of times people engage in corruption because they say, well, my cause is worth it. If you stuff ballots, that's corruption. I'm picking one in LA because that was kind of ridiculous. In LA, they had an election for mayor. It's going to a runoff. But when they had the election, there was first place finish, the second place finish, and the third place finish was about 6 points behind the second place finish. It's amazing. Do you know 80% of the write-in votes were for the third place finisher, whose basic policy objectives were the same as the first place finish, the current mayor, and so elevated her ahead of the second place guy who said, we got a lot of problems in LA. We need to change this or change that. So there'd be no choice. In other words, if you're choosing, that was corruption. When you're stuffing mailboxes, you're committing fraud. That's corruption. Now, a lot of people, the corrupt always say, oh, I'm not corrupt. He's corrupt. He's doing it. Why they do that? It's, deflection stuff like that, but then that's the loss of what? Treating everybody by the same standard. That's why I make jokes about Trump being a fascist. Trump was not a person who arrested his political enemies or the people who donated to people he didn't like. Trump didn't do that. That was done by the IRS, which audited people according to their political beliefs that the IRS didn't like. That was done to President Obama. That was done to, President Biden. But you dislike it. Few people engage it. I may not like you. I may think this person's whatever. I don't care. My whole thing is, policemen, they were doing 75 in a 25 zone. Here's the ticket. Whether I like you or I like you is irrelevant. The vast majority of people will not take a bribe. The thing of I may be poor, but you won't see me scamming on something, stuff like that. That is, you dislike corruption. Few people get out. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but it's very rare. We had a vice president of the United States resign for having taken, I was going to forget his name. Vice President of the United States. I'm going to have to ask. It was Nixon's VP, Spiro Agnew. There we go. Spiro Agnew. He resigned because he took $10,000 in bribe. And even then, it was income tax evasion. In other words, he didn't pay taxes on it. And it was the country that, to give you an idea, the president of France during the same time period took between 10 and 50 million in bribes. The French to this day will say, like, no, he was a great man. In fact, one of the reasons Howard Zinn's history of the United States, people's history of the United States, is a joke, is because he does that double standard all the time. The place who dislike corruption, it tends to get reduced and found out that people broke the law, but it's like, yeah, they broke the law. They were engaging in bribes, kickbacks, we get rid of it. When they're stealing, we get rid of it. The vast majority of the population, 98, 99%, are self-policing, which means, again, the government has to deal with 2%. Boom, that's there. Next level of corruption is you have it, but you dislike it. In other words, again, most of the top, corruption will cluster the governmental sector because private corruption will slowly kill the firm, the people involved in it. The governmental selection corruption there will feast on gloriously. This Ukrainian thing against corruption, which they're pointing out, we gained corruption from having been communist. In other words, it put on notions the idea you can steal, bribe, because communist officials did that to countries they run. They had no problem with making themselves rich, saying they're doing so much better, they deserve extra. What are they doing? They're making true sense of justice. Now, when I say have it but dislike it, this is like a recovering alcoholic. A recovering alcoholic can't go near alcohol. They are vulnerable to it. They have a weakness for it. So in this kind of society, on a societal macro level, they say, realize, yes, corruption is bad. We need to get rid of it. Bribes, kickbacks, special favors, all these things are bad. Pay for play. We got to get rid of that. But on the personal level, this is where the alcohol item comes in. Oh, but if it's going to make me an extra $5 million and I can get away with it, I'm probably going to do it. That's the difficulty. That is a problem. And so, as a nation, they want to get rid of it, but on the personal level, they succumb to it. An example is one of our one of our mission kids, who grew up in another country, was coming, school in North Greenville. He was a freshman. He was driving down, the road with a few other kids. They went to a school zone, doing 45. It's 35 zone. Policemen, flash their lights to go and stop and give him a ticket. When they stop, he pulls out his wallet and he starts getting out about $50. And the other kid's, what are you doing? He goes, what's the policeman? We got to pay him. I'm like, no! He's like, you don't pay policemen? No, not this way. We'll all get out in jail. They'll bring us in. They'll say we're bribing a policeman. And the policeman go back to the one. The policeman will be affronted. Someone think they're going to bribe me? People here, they'll think I can be bribed. I can't be. No. They're going to drag you in and say, these people are trying to bribe me. And then somebody else can say, oh, yeah, it's a mission kid. Didn't realize what he was doing. He shouldn't have done it. Because I don't want people to even think I could take a bribe. In other words, that's dislike it. On a habit but dislike it, if someone offers the policeman, he'll take the bribe. Yes, he believes there should be corruption overall, but this is making me better off. In other words, remember we talked when Christ talks about the fact of do not worry about the mote in your brother's eye. Worry about the log in your own eye. Because the mote in my brother's eye, dealing with that so much easier because why? It gives me no inconvenience. The log in my own eye, the plank in my own eye, dealing with that's inconvenient. And so they're very vulnerable on a personal level. Tip corruption. In tip corruption, the government's going to demand to take about 5 or 10. I shouldn't say the government. The person in the government running the agencies is going to take about 5 or 10% of the contract. Literally speaking, it's there. Now, the country wants things to get done. So the acceptable view is you take 5 or 10%. So if you're in some countries and something's being built, yes, you can demand a gratuity, like a tip, because you're performing a service for them. You're a government worker and you're performing a service for them. They should give you a tip for you approving it. The only time you get in trouble in those kinds of societies is when nothing gets done. In other words, if you're stopping things, it's there. An example of ideological corruption, which would be, it's sliding towards forward when people don't approve projects because they don't want people building, but the project met all the legal requirements. But the person doesn't want it built, so say no. Well, yeah, but they met all the legal and all the requirements done. They've done that. Oh, I just still don't want it. That's corruption. That's an ideological corruption. That's still corruption. You're treating someone differently. And so that is crippling. So in these kinds of societies, the side only gets mad when you're stopping things from getting done. As long as things are getting done, it's acceptable. It's a strange dichotomy balance, but a number of countries have this. I don't like it because, again, this is creating, remember we just did brick theory, this is creating bricks again. This is creating barriers because who can afford to bribe the government? The rich, the powerful. And the government likes the rich and the powerful, as we're going to see in a minute. Then there is suck dry corruption. Again, another cartoon from a different country. And a lot of countries have the same term for corruption. It's called the bite. And it has a giant mosquito usually sucking people dry. And that's the point. In suck dry corruption, the government takes everything. The people in the government take it all because they think, they have a communist thought thinking what? If you're on property, you're in this, you're in that, the money's just falling from the sky on you. And you're really stealing and oppressing. And so if I just take it from you, I'm just taking it from a different person who's stealing, so it's okay. And I realized, wait a minute, no, the guy making rubber duckies, he's actually making rubber duckies. People buying the rubber duckies because they like rubber duckies. That's it. When you think that way, things you're just stealing. And so, literally speaking, the nation is sucked dry and stopped by its corruption. And the culture accepts corruption at a massive level. They did that, but because they all have this mentality thinking, I can just get as much as I want from them, there'll always be more. The Chinese have a saying, peasants like sesame seeds. You can always get more oil. If you always squeeze them and get more oil. It's kind of funny because it's a very small seed. How do you think you can keep getting oil out of that when it's so small? And you keep, no, you keep squeezing, get more oil. And that's the way they view peasants. I think because they're still alive. A grad school joke, an example of this. Two people go to London School of Economics. They're in grad school. They're working together, stuff like that. And 10 years later, they're both their respective countries' finance minister. The second one's facing the first one. He sees him. He's got this nice, beautiful mansion. He's got a half dozen Mercedes. He's got a dozen servants. It's a beautiful place. Because he goes, how? The first one walks to the window, pulls over the curtain, and he goes, you see that highway? And he looks out, there's a highway, and buildings and cities and factories. He goes, yes. He goes, 10%. Second one nods. 6 months later, the first one's visiting the second one. The guy's got Lamborghinis lined up. His driveway is done in marble. The whole thing is done in marble and stone and, actual works. He's got fantastic works of art. He goes, how does this? The guy walks to a bay window, opens the window, walks down the balcony. He goes, do you see that highway? The first guy looks out and sees trees and birds and maybe a cow, and he goes, no. The first one goes, 100%. In other words, they took everything. They sucked it all dry. That's why I've seen in these countries, the governmental sector is rich. One, because the government just sucks into itself saying, I'm the government, I'm the big wiggy. If I'm living well, everybody else will live well. And two, corruption sucks it all in. Again, corruption leads to brick theory. Corruption is a massive enforcement creator of brick theory. LA, now this is the Karzai government of Afghanistan, which fell. Right? And it was this government, which had an army of 400,000 men, was fighting the Taliban, which had 80,000 men. The Afghan government fell. Country fell in like a month and a half. Why? You had them outnumbered 5-1. You shouldn't have been able to lose. You should have curb stomped them. No, they collapsed. Because why? Afghanistan was corrupt. In fact, we didn't want to, if we tried to get rid of corruption, we'd say, oh, you're attacking their culture. How can you attack Afghani culture? It's just the Afghanis would say this. You're attacking our culture. You're trying to impose your views on us. It's like, you're taking bribes, kickbacks. Everybody knew the Karzai government was, enriching itself. Karzai was enriching himself. And so, and as I said, the sad thing is the weight of it gums everything up. It locks it all up. Only the rich in society can afford to pay the bribes to the top. The funny thing is when you end up with corruption, you'll have people go, oh, it's corruption. We need this giant, powerful government. Only socialism will save us from corruption. Okay, your government officials take bribes, and only by giving your government officials more power will corruption go away. How does that work? And so that magnifies the problem. In fact, why does the rich benefit so much? Easy. When I'm a rich person in society, a billionaire, I do not pay any local yokels. I pay the big Pumbas. I pay, the head of the secret police or whatever it's going to be called, and the head of government. I pay them both $2 million a year because, hey, I'm a billionaire. So when I'm driving along, my chauffeur's driving along, and we're bouncing around on Rolls Royce, and we're seizing somebody else's property because the King Poobah, I'm paying him $2 million a year for a reason, so I go and seize it. If some local sheriff tries to stop me, demanding a bribe or something like that because I look rich, I call up the head of the secret police and say, yeah, this local sheriff, badge, 2344791, he's harassing me. Can you put him in jail with Bubba? He's lonely. Thank you. Till you're under arrest now, and you have no office, and you're dead. So what happens? The local sheriff, stuff like that, they ignore me because I didn't pay them off. A local business have to pay them off. Anybody else who's powerful to come and harass them, anybody above them wants to do stuff like that, I don't need to pay off the guy at top. The head of the country, stuff like that. The head of the, the equivalent of the FBI, whatever it is, because that gets me there. Now remember, like with all sin, we all sin. The corrupt hate the non-corrupt. Why do they hate the non-corrupt? It's like with alternative preference. People get, oh, you're heteronormative, you're this, that, the other thing. You shouldn't be allowed to exist. They're spewing hate. It's like they just have an opinion like us. No, it should not be allowed because why? They hate the non-corrupt. For the non-corrupt, by their very existence, their mere existence reveals the corrupt. Whereas the non-corrupt, by their very existence, reveals the corrupt, because you may not be pointing them out, but by the fact of you're not taking bribes, you're not making yourselves rich, you're doing your job properly, you show them for what they are. So just like all sinners hate the presence of someone not engaging in their sin, because it reveals the truth just by their existence. And so they go after them. Again, multicultural moral relativism are especially damaging when dealing with corruption. When you say that all cultures are equal, and they are not. A corrupt culture will not be as efficient as non-corrupt. In fact, when a society accepts corruption, especially in a multi-ethnic group, it is a killer. It chokes people out. It stops us. It prevents us from moving forward. Why does it prevent us from moving forward? Because of the fact it prevents people from seeing. I can't trust somebody because they will steal if I can. So I'm hiring my second cousin, Twigglegum. He's an idiot, but I know he won't steal from me. Or if he does steal from me, I can go and kick the crud out of him, and no one else is going to care because why? That's family. But see, I can't hire somebody I don't know. And this is why you're rich and you're powerful. Promote multicultural. They do what they want. Everyone can do their own values and stuff like that because it creates a cost. It creates corruption, a cost, an uncertainty cost to hiring and enabling people you don't know from having a chance. It presents a barrier because I can't know everybody. When there is no corruption, everybody earnestly tries their best, I can give some guy out from the podunks in Northern Maine a chance because why? His resume looks good. He's going to try his best. He's not going to steal from me. He's not going to engage me lazy or anything like that. Boom, I give him a chance. When we're in a low trust society, when I have high corruption, stuff like that, because a low trust society tends to be a high corruption society because everybody does what's right in their own eyes, I don't give him a chance. Because why? I don't know him from Job. And so that means I only hire people and promote people I know. The insiders, the billionaire class, they like that because it's easier for nepotism to prosper. Now, nepotism, right? It's not nepotism. If I own a company and I give the company to my son, it's not nepotism. That he's going to have that anyway. If you own a farm and you give it to your kid, that's not nepotism. They're going to inherit it anyway because you know, if your child's an idiot, you're going to pay the price for it. The farm's going to pay the price for it. The firm's going to pay the price for it. Nepotism is when I am a high person Disney, and I hire my son to Disney Plus programming who has no idea of what he's doing, but he's my son because I am not paying for that. Who is paying for that? Disney is. Disney shareholders are paying for that. And so, that in a low trust society operates that way. And people say, well, I'm just helping my child. With your own money, you can help your child all you want, but you're stealing somebody else's money to help your child. That's corruption. That's unethical. And so when you have a large degree of corruption, it creates a barrier. It prevents people from having an opportunity to moving up, to getting a shot at things because why? They've been locked out. And then when you rope into multiculturalism, then people can do all sorts of evil things and say, oh, you're just picking them because they're different colors or different ethnicity or different religion. No. I'm looking at an individual, a person who committed a crime. And so, that is a difficulty. It's why multiculturalism is doomed to fail because understanding other cultures is perfectly fine. Saying they all equal the same, that leads to trouble. You can have lots of cultures as long as you recognize everybody individually as individuals. But even then, what's their views of corruption? What do you point? And this becomes a difficulty. It's great talking with you. You guys are all fun.